colleagues, and welcome online. Welcome to anyone who is joining us online across Monmouthshire or beyond. And this is the special meeting of the Scrutiny meeting of Performance and Overview. And we are looking at some really important agenda items today. But because it's a special meeting, we'll be able to go very much straight to those items rather than looking at minutes and forward plan, which, if anyone is looking at this and wondering why those things are not on the agenda, that's the reason. It's a special meeting that we arranged above the norm. Now I'm going to, on the request of colleagues in the chamber, I'm going to go to item 5 first of all, for the very good reason that colleagues are dealing with item 5, which is the Welsh Language Standards Annual Monitoring Report. They have another meeting which clashes. And so I hope everyone's okay that we actually go straight to that agenda item, and we'll do so directly after the introductory points, which are, first of all, for apologies for our absence, and I think we've got Councillor Bond and Councillor Fuchs.
Yes, that's correct, Chair.
I think it would be very helpful, given events over the course of the last week, that probably drawing Councillor Fuchs to other matters, that we seek clarity on whether or not Councillor Fuchs is planning on continuing to be a member of the committee. I recognise she's not been able to attend the previous meeting and has found it difficult to attend on some other occasions more recently. So I think it would be very good for us to ask if the...
Chair, could I interrupt there? Obviously, I'm in attention doing that right now. We are discussing forward plans for reassigning people to certain committees. So it's all in hand.
That is great. It's good if it's in hand. Obviously, it needs to be in our hands as well, so we know who is on the committee. This is the reason I mention it is pretty obvious. Councillor Fuchs continues to be a member of the committee unless otherwise stated. It's particularly important because we're dealing with a special meeting today, which is examining the next 5 years' financial strategy. It could hardly be more important, and therefore, this is not something that can just happen in due course. I appreciate what you're saying, Councillor Crick, but
I've only started that this morning.
Yeah, I appreciate the clarification, but I think, as I've said, it would be important that we write to Councillor Fuchs just to seek clarity on that. Thank you. And so Councillor Bond has also indicated she's not been able to join today. Moving on to declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest that we've received? None in the room, none online. So we'll move straight to item 5, which is, and then we'll revert back to the sequence of item 3 and 4. So over to the report on Welsh Language Standards Annual Monitoring Report to scrutinise the Council's performance in 2023-2024. We have Councillor Angela Sandals. Thank you for being here, and I expect you might want to just introduce the report, Councillor Sandals. And we're also joined by colleagues Nia Roberts and Penny Walker in the chamber. So over to you, Councillor Sandals.
Prynawn da bawb, a diolch gadeirydd. We all know that the Welsh language is an important and vital part of our heritage and culture. Throughout the year 2023 to 2024, the Council has been dedicated to fostering an environment where the Welsh language can thrive and Welsh speakers are able to use the language in their everyday lives. Monmouthshire was pleased to hold the Eisteddfod in Abergavenny in 2016. We also applied to be considered for the next 5-year cycle, but we're unsuccessful. However, we have provisionally been asked to facilitate the Urdd in 2031, and if successful, we would be really looking forward to that and be proud to host it. Welsh language is an important part of our portfolio, that we have a thriving Welsh language and support to increase its use within Monmouthshire. We're investing in Welsh education, including a new Welsh medium school, Ysgol Gymraeg Trefynwy, in Monmouth. Our Welsh language annual monitoring report evaluates our compliance with the Welsh language standards and the ways in which we have to promote the Welsh language during the financial year 2023-24. Firstly, to give some background context to this report, in total there are 176 Welsh language standards which apply to Monmouthshire. These are grouped into the following 5 categories: service delivery, policy making, operational, promotion and record keeping. It's a requirement of standards that we produce this annual report to evaluate our compliance. Additionally, this report offers us an opportunity to identify areas where we're succeeding, but also to identify areas for improvement. Our report must include data regarding complaints we've received, Welsh language skills of staff, Welsh language courses, and Welsh language recruitment. Here are some main points from the report. We've received 2 complaints from members of the public and 1 complaint for the Welsh Language Commissioner around street naming. We offer Welsh language courses to staff at all learning levels. These are facilitated through the National Centre of Learning Welsh and are delivered through Coleg Gwent. Courses are fully funded through the Welsh language budget, and staff can choose whether they want to attend during work hours or in the evenings. 40 staff members registered for a course this year. This is an increase from last year where there were 32 registrations. Monmouthshire was awarded with the Employer of the Year Award 23-24 at the Dysgu Gymraeg event awards, which I was proud to attend last August with colleague Nia Roberts last August. Welsh Tip is included in every issue of the Compass, which is the fortnightly staff newsletter. These Welsh tips include information about the Welsh language standards and guidance on best practice. The Cymraeg Teams channel continues to be utilised as a way for Welsh speaking and learning and for staff members to be able to speak Welsh with their colleagues. The Welsh Language Officer also uses the Teams channel to disseminate information about Welsh language support available to staff and local Welsh language events in the community. The Welsh Language Officer takes part in the corporate induction process, where staff are given information about the Council's requirements to the Welsh language standards and the support available to them as soon as they start their careers with the Council. So that's a brief overview, and I'll hand over now to Penny Walker. Thank you. Diolch, Cadeirydd.
Thank you, Councillor Sanders. And if we work on the assumption that colleagues have read the report, it would be good to highlight key issues that you might want to bring to attention and our attention. Then we'll move to questions if that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As said, my name is Penny Walker and I'm the Equality and Welsh Language Manager now in my 4th month. My background is in equality, diversity, inclusion, so the Welsh language standards are a new string to my bow. In the last 4 months I've been getting to grips with the standards and what's required, and luckily I have Nia with me who's been here for about 18 months. Councillor Sandals has covered quite a bit. As she said, it is a large part of our heritage and culture, and we want to see it thriving in Monmouthshire. Although we do have standards to adhere to and need to be compliant on all of them, as well as report back to the Welsh Commissioner, hence this report for 23-24. There are challenges, and we are developing an action plan to ensure that we are compliant to the standards in terms of our website, social media and correspondence, and we will be reviewing the way we carry out translations. Councillor Sandals has covered a lot of about the take-up of the Welsh language courses, the Welsh tip in the staff newsletter, corporate induction, and the Teams channel for all Welsh speakers. Some of the challenges have been the delay in procurement of the new telephony contact centre system, which has meant that Welsh language calls have been unable to be connected to the contact centre. Instead, calls are going through a hunt system and the Welsh callers are directed to a Welsh-speaking officer. The good news is that the procurement of the system is currently in its final stages, and we've recently recently employed a Welsh-speaking member of staff in the contact centre, and additionally an advert is out currently for a Welsh language essential post. Additionally to this, there have been 2 contact centre staff members who've been learning Welsh for the past 2 years, so they can offer some assistance. Looking to the future, we're looking to utilise the Council's new training platform, Thinky, to make Welsh language training more easily accessible to all staff. It will also allow us to monitor more effectively when staff are completing mandatory Welsh language training. Additionally, we are intending to incorporate staff self-reporting their Welsh language skills onto the Thinky platform, which will allow us to keep a more accurate record of our staff's Welsh language skills. So I welcome your scrutiny of the Welsh Language Report 23-24. Thank you, Chair. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Penny. I don't know if you wanted to add anything or simply to take questions as they arise. Okay, thank you. So open to questions from committee members. If you have any, thank you. And please raise your hand in the chat. Councillor Buckler, I see your hand raised, but not in the chat. If you could raise your hand in the chat, it'd be helpful.
Sorry, Chair, I do apologise. I clicked the wrong thing. So all rather complicated, obviously. What I'd like to, you mentioned that there are challenges. Which challenges are most pressing and why? And the mandatory Welsh language training, what does that involve? How many hours? And what level of proficiency are staffs supposed to attain? And are there, if people can't attain it, are there sort of penalties? Sort of how are you sort of engaging staff and future staff in a positive way to embrace the Welsh language, but without disadvantaging people who don't speak it at all? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Buckler. I don't know who wants to respond to that.
So if I start with the mandatory staff training, so in terms of, we don't have mandatory staff training for Welsh language skills, so that's all kind of dependent on the staff member to decide to take those courses. The types of mandatory staff training we've got is things like Welsh language awareness, so learning more about the language and learning more about the Welsh language standards and things like that. Part of that is incorporated into the induction process. So when staff members first start with us, I'll go over what our standards are, what our requirements are to the standards. So hopefully that's answered that question. So challenges. In the past year, I would say one of the main challenges has been this telephony system for our contact centre. So as mentioned, at the moment, if somebody wants to speak to us in Welsh, we can't direct them straight to the contact centre to speak to an advisor there. So they are put through to a Welsh Hunt group. So it's got offices across the authority who speak Welsh, and then from there then we can direct them to the contact centre. So that would usually involve a Welsh speaking staff member bringing them back. That's been one of the main challenges. Hopefully that's answered your question there.
Can I just add to that as well?
Please, Penny.
Coming in new to this, to the Welsh language standards, I think what I've seen as a big challenge is really raising awareness across the council, across everywhere, what the standards entail and what we need to be doing as our duty, and what the requirements are. So I think that's very much where Ania and I are looking at doing an action plan in terms of raising awareness across the council of what is expected of us as a public body.
Could I just, ask a supplementary question to this? Given that 83%, I think it is, of residents in Monmouthshire are unable to speak any Welsh, do we have to apply the same standards as, for example, Gwynedd, where something like 75% speak Welsh to a certain level? So there is no varying scale for a county that actually the vast majority of people have no Welsh whatsoever. Is that the case?
Yes, so our standards will be pretty much the same as other authorities. So some authorities may have some additional standards, but overall, yes, we would be held at the same kind of level as more Welsh-speaking areas.
Okay, thank you. I see Marion House, Councillor Howells with his raised hand.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for bringing this report to us. Just a couple of questions from me. I noticed that we have 40 staff currently learning Welsh, which is really good, an improvement on previous years. Are we given some sort of incentive to sort of encourage more to take it up? The other question I had was on regards to standard 83, bilingual email addresses. I didn't know this. Is this something that councillors should be having two email addresses? Certainly having shirvanwy.gov.uk would be easier than Monmouthshire, which I quite often miss out a few letters. The other thing was I was pleased to see Monmouthshire doing well in the election with their Welsh language in the way that it was presented. So Welsh first, and then the figures announced in Welsh, and then the English, just the figures without repeating the name and the party, etc., which I thought was ran very smoothly, unlike some other councils that weren't so well prepared for it, and some didn't even have a Welsh fluent speaker to announce the results. I just wonder if there's anything in our policy that that we wouldn't fall into that route of not having a Welsh speaker to make the announcements. That's it. Regards to contact centres, I mean, I guess that post is available across Wales, is it? There wouldn't be, it's a work from home position, so are we looking at other areas to recruit, sort of, further west, etc., Cardiff? So
thank you, Councillor Howells. So again, who wants to address those questions?
So to answer the first question in terms of incentives for staff to learn Welsh, unfortunately we're quite limited as to what incentives we can offer, but obviously the big incentive is that these courses are fully funded. So they're fully funded and staff are able to learn Welsh during their work hours. They do have a choice. So say if they're in a position where they might do lone working and they wouldn't necessarily be able to do a Welsh course during work hours, they would be able to do it in the evenings. So that's the kind of incentive that we offer. But staff are, they're taking it quite positively. So obviously we've got 40 people doing the courses, and as the Welsh language officer, I do kind of impromptu meetings with them just to see how they're doing and how they're enjoying the courses. And although a lot of people are saying it's quite difficult learning Welsh, which you would expect to learn a brand new language, they say that they really enjoy the process, and they enjoy the courses through Dysgu Cymraeg Gwent as well. And then for the second question, which is regards to the bilingual email addresses, so this is something fairly new that we've put in place, where we've been able to get these bilingual email addresses. So every staff member and councillor should have this email address, but we just need to do the promotion on them, which we will be doing. We'll be doing so
imminently.
Yeah, so that is the plan. We'll be doing promotion on these email addresses. So once that's done, everybody will hopefully then update their website pages and make sure that they've got the Welsh email addresses on there and they're using them in any correspondence and things like that as well. In terms of our contact centre, so the contact centre, as far as I'm aware, are based in, is it Chepstow, I think, in Chepstow Hub. So although I think they can do some home working, they are also in the office. So if we were to try and employ from further afield, that would obviously need to be a discussion that we would have with the contact centre manager there to see if it would be a possibility that someone would be able to be fully home working. But it's a conversation that we can have with the manager. Obviously, we've got this one post out at the moment, which is Welsh Language Essential, and we're trying to promote that as much as we possibly can. So we've got it on Welsh recruitment sites and promoting it on our social media pages as well. So we're hoping very much that we'll be able to get a Welsh speaker there. I'm not sure if I've answered all the questions there.
That sounded very thorough to me. Councillor Howes, was there anything else?
Yeah, no, thanks very much for that. The courses, are they available to councillors as well?
Yes, they are.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And also, sorry, there was the question on the election, whether they're in the policy that we've got anything written that, any announcements, public announcements that they're made, sort of with somebody that has a knowledge of Welsh.
I think attempt to answer that, but I don't think you're writing that policy for the council. I think that's something we need to probably relate as a question. But I think there is an issue there about the clarification of what public announcements, because if it became a case of employing somebody to be there on hand for every public announcement, you might not be suggesting that. So, if it's just about elections, then again, it might be that we specify that, Councillor Howes. But perhaps we could ask that question, more broadly. I mean, I don't want to suggest that you can't answer that, but I thought you responded to that in the broad terms without it relating to HR policy.
Yes, I'd agree with what you said. I'll just add that, it was great to see that, obviously, a fluid Welsh speaker doing the announcement like that. It's fantastic. And it's great that we have that person as well.
Yeah, good stuff. Okay, I'm going to move on to Councillor. Thank you. I'm going to move on to Councillor Strong.
Yeah, thank you. And perhaps in relation to that last one, could you just pass on our congratulations for how well it was done, rather than put it as a question. Just a couple of points about the figures used in the report. 3.3, it gives us figures for how many are registered to learn Welsh, that figure being 40. But that's 40 registered. Elsewhere, we got the same figure used for how many are completing the report, the course. I suppose that the difference is a very subtle one, so would accept that they will be the same. I would like to know, though, how many, and this will go a bit historic, of course, how many actually complete those courses? What sort of dropout figure do we have, or does everybody actually manage to complete? And then on page 13, we list Welsh speakers by directorate. What do you classify as a Welsh speaker? Is that a beginner, intermediate, advanced? Yeah. And then finally, I mean, the issue came up of Welsh desirable on our application forms. Am I right in thinking that Welsh desirable only comes into play as one of the criteria if all the others are equally, everybody else is sort of equally scored? Otherwise, it doesn't come into play at all. Sorry if I haven't explained that very well. I think you probably
No, I think that just that is clear. Thank you, Councillor Strong. Again, Nia, did you want to respond to these?
Yes, so firstly I'll apologise because the phrasing there of registering and completing is just a mistake on my part, so I'll have to update that.
No need.
So it is...
It's very refreshing. I can't remember the last time I've heard any officer, any member of staff saying, you know what, I got something wrong. So well done, you, Nia.
The difference is so subtle as to be insignificant.
Yes,
right?
yeah.
No, well done indeed. Thank you.
I completely agree on that one. So it will be definitely one that we will update. So it is. So 40 is the number of people that have actually completed their courses. So I think in the last year we had about 2 people that unfortunately had registered and then had to drop out. It was shortly after starting the courses, but that was for personal reasons, which obviously is very understandable. So in terms of in the report and what we count as Welsh speaking, so that would be anyone that have got any skills at all, including beginner level. And then I've obviously got figures there about fluent Welsh speakers as well. And then, sorry, if you could just remind me of the last question, if that's okay.
Yeah, the use of Welsh desirable on our application and interview forms.
It only kicks in after all the other criteria have been met, is the question, I think.
So what we encourage staff to do is to include that Welsh desirable in the person specification. So if we do have 2 candidates that obviously are almost head to head in terms of their other skills, but one is a Welsh speaker, then we'd be able to score them appropriately for those extra Welsh speaking skills because they are desirable.
Just connected to that question before I ask Councillor Pavia, do we have any information as a border county to the English-speaking nation of England, do we have any information about whether or not the requirement to be prepared to learn Welsh is a deterrent to applicants in England? Because at a personal level, I've certainly talked to people who would see that as something that they haven't want to do, and we are sometimes very hard pressed to recruit in different services. Do we have any information about that?
I wouldn't have any specific information or data, unfortunately, about that. I think, for example, when we put Welsh language essential posts out, what we try to encourage people to do is for managers to state in the job description itself what kind of Welsh skills are needed. For example, if they were to be able to come into a meeting like this and speak Welsh, it would require a higher level of skills than if it's just a matter of maybe using a few phrases every day. So we certainly try and do that with Welsh language essential posts, and that is to try and encourage more Welsh learners to apply for those kind of posts and to have the confidence to go for those posts. But yeah, unfortunately, I don't have information specifically for your question there at the moment.
Thank you, Nia.
It's something we could ask HR, though, couldn't we? We could find out if they hold that sort of information.
I think it would be useful, for the very obvious reason that, we in some areas we struggle to recruit to positions. It would be good to know, as you'd think the one singular advantage of a border county to England would be that we'd be able to access applicants from England, and we wouldn't want to deter them from an interest. It may be that they might be overly concerned. I simply don't know, but certainly at a personal level, I've certainly had discussions with people who would say they wouldn't want to apply because they simply haven't got time to start learning Welsh. They may misunderstand the requirement. Thank you, that's very helpful. And moving on to Councillor Pavia.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and can I thank officers for the report. I suppose just to follow on Councillor Strong's point, and he was talking about attrition data for those completing courses. Do we have data on staff members moving through the proficiency steps in terms of going from beginner, intermediate into advanced? Are we capturing that data? And if so, certainly are we for communication purposes, to raise awareness and to give people confidence, are we capturing their journey as a case study or collection of case studies? So I'm sure staff and councillors would be fascinated to read about someone's proficiency journey through the various stages. Second question, Chair, in terms of social care, and it's obviously good to see increasing numbers of Welsh speakers within the social care workforce. Do we have the capacity to ensure that we can provide an active offer
in terms of service care provision if it's requested. Just thinking of, care assessments. I appreciate, we I think most of our domiciliary care provision is commissioned out, but that might change obviously in the future. But have we got enough sufficiency within the workforce to allow that to happen if that is requested from residents? And finally, we haven't taken the decision to have a simultaneous translation offer for our council meetings. Is this something that we're potentially scoping? This is my second term now as councillor, and I think in terms of this cohort of councillors from 2022, I think we've got the most Welsh speakers that I've known potentially in the council's history. And whilst not every committee meeting might not be facilitated with simultaneous translation, I think potentially full council meetings might be something that we could look at in the future. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Pavia. And again, Pavia, if you'd like to address those, and if possible, we could keep the responses reasonably brief. We've got a lot to cover today. Thank you.
Yes, so in terms of completing courses, I keep a track of who's completing courses and if they're going to the next level, if they're keeping to learning Welsh. I try to be quite close to the staff and make sure that I'm there if they want to speak to me. So what will often happen when the advertisement for courses go out is I will say that anyone can contact me to discuss. And then that way I'm able to get feedback of how they've enjoyed the course and how it's going and things like that. So in terms of the social care, I haven't got the exact information in front of me now in terms of our staff in social care that have got Welsh language skills. Obviously, we've got the more than just words strategy, so we would have to adhere to that. And then for the simultaneous translations for meetings, so at the moment it's by a case-by-case basis. So if someone would like to ask a question in Welsh, then we can certainly get a simultaneous translation sorted for that. Obviously, we would just need some kind of notice beforehand to get that sorted.
Thank you, Nia. And I see, Councillor Strong, did you have a quick follow-up, or that's already been dealt with? Sorry, thank you. I have one additional question, which is from Councillor Lucas, who asked to join the meeting with one specific, or a specific question that I know she wanted to raise. So, Councillor Lucas, welcome, and please do ask your question.
Thank you. Thank you very much for allowing me to ask the question. But firstly, may I congratulate, is it Nia, who is obviously, you've done amazing. You were obviously quite nervous initially, but it's coming over wonderful. So well done you. It's brilliant to listen to. So thank you very much. My question is, I'm a severe dyslexic, and one of the problems I have whilst driving, bear in mind that's what I do for a living, is that when you go past a road sign, it's very hard to catch where the English and the Welsh separate, and I'm not a Welsh speaker. Well, I can speak some Welsh, but I'm certainly not a Welsh reader unless it's a RAF, in which case I know what that one means. But I was wondering, could we, and I appreciate we can't change what's already happened, but could we in the future going forward, when we're making road signs in particular, put a horizontal line between the English and the Welsh, in a nice little thick lines through the middle, so that we can catch where they separate and you can read. That would help in road safety issues, and it would certainly help everybody getting less confused, and it would certainly help me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lucas. I dare say this again, something that, Nia, you may not be able to directly respond to, but it may be something that we could develop within the Council as a question, and perhaps a response to that question. But please, if you have any particular thoughts.
Just as a general note regarding signage like that, it is a part of the Welsh language standards that with signage, the Welsh has to appear before the English. so that it's likely to be read first. So the one positive of this is if you're driving along and you always know that the Welsh is going to be on top of the English, before the English, then you should be able then to see, you're more likely to be able to see where on the sign you need to look. So that's the positive of having that there. But as you mentioned, something like that would obviously need to be looked further into if it would be possible. But I know that things like standardisation of signs and things like that would come into it as well.
Thank you.
Can I just add, sorry,
yes.
with my qualities head on and dyslexia, I think it's something we can raise and look into, isn't it, as well, and see with the sign making department.
Yeah, I think Councillor Lucas's question is particularly geared to dyslexic readers, but it wouldn't be an unreasonable comment to make for people. Again, this point where 83% of residents in Monmouthshire have no Welsh. Are they actually paying insufficient attention to the English if it appears after the Welsh? Councillor Lucas, did you want to come back on that or to have any other point related?
No, I think Penny sort of hit the nail on the head, but to be fair, yes, I know the Welsh comes first. That doesn't alter the fact if you don't know where the English starts and you're driving along the road, it's gone before you get there. So, if it's like it's a scientific known fact to believe that your eyes skim when you go into a supermarket hundreds of items on the shelf to find, and you look for things that you know. So labels, that's the reason why labels are so important to people, how they're coloured, etc. And that's what we're trained to do, whether we like it or not. Subconsciously, that's what happens. So by a horizontal line, just one simple little thick bar would bump, the eye would go straight to where you need to, whether it's above or below. I'm not saying one's right and the other's wrong, just saying it would certainly help.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Lucas. And I guess, we're all driving at 20 miles per hour now, so we get a bit longer to read them. But, it's not a solution to those other areas where we're driving at, normal, faster speeds. But in the meantime, thank you for that. Thank you for the responses. And, sorry, Councillor Howes.
Sorry, can I just comment on that one as well, address Councillor Lucas's? I've had conversations with people as well with the confusion and a line. I would definitely say a line, just to segregate that so that you're not following. I'm bilingual, so I can follow it, but most people wouldn't distinguish letters. So the other point that was made to me was whether or not we could have little flags attached to them, so Welsh, so it draws the eye instantly rather than sort of looking at letters which look all the same.
Great. I think that point has been noted, and that you've kindly suggested, Penny and Nia, that you'll raise that within the wider. It's traffic management. It's also compliance issues. I'm sure this is not a simple thing to suggest that changes are made, but sometimes it starts with a question, and that might well be the constructive question that Councillor Lucas raised. So thank you everyone for the questions and responses. Thank you, Nia. Thank you, Penny. Thank you, Councillor Sandals, for the report, and I move that report, and I don't see any objections to that being accepted, and we move forward to go back in the agenda to item number 3. Just as colleagues leave the chamber, we'll move on to item number 3. And in doing so, I welcome Councillor Callard, the Cabinet Member, and to Peter Davis, the Section 151 officer, and online we have Jonathan Davis. I guess for the more difficult questions, Jonathan, you're on standby, I have no doubt. But thank you for being there, and we'll move on to the consideration of the medium-term financial plans, financial strategy, MTFP, for the medium-term financial plan, and to provide formal feedback ahead of the Council next week on the 18th of July. And the indications here are the strategy to follow after the pre-election period. So if we could move on to perhaps an introduction to that report, Councillor Callard, and perhaps you wanted to introduce it.
Thank you, Chair. This is the first medium-term financial strategy the Council has developed. The strategy sets out a path and approach for the Council to secure a sustainable financial future, one that allows the Council to deliver its policy aims and objectives as set out in the Community and Corporate Plan. For the first time, it takes a longer-term view, extending our horizon and facilitating a more proactive and preventative approach. The financial strategy sits alongside the Council's Community and Corporate Plan as part of our strategic framework. It sets out and provides the context for our current financial position, and it details the risks, opportunities and cost drivers that will influence this over the next 5 years. The strategy also looks to create a line of separation between the medium-term financial strategy and a medium-term financial plan, with the former there to inform the latter. Notwithstanding, the strategy draws on the most up-to-date medium-term financial plan modelling available. The financial strategy is set out in 3 distinct parts. Where the organisation is now, framed as the challenge, where we analyse the Council's current financial situation, including its main sources of income, its main financial commitments and the level of reserves that it holds. Where it would like to be, framed as the response, where we assess how the Council envisages its financial capacity and capability to facilitate the achievement of its strategic aims. This provides a longer-term financial vision for the Council, which is consistent with its overall strategic vision. And lastly, how it plans to get there, the delivery, with actions designed to take the authority from where it currently stands, from a financial viewpoint, to where it would like to be. Over the last decade, the Council has faced significant challenges. The austerity years, the implications of Brexit, and more recently the COVID-19 pandemic, wars in Ukraine and the Middle East, and the persistently high inflation and a stagnant national economic situation. These financial impacts are felt both in terms of price and wage inflation, high demand for high-cost services such as social care and homelessness, and the impact on the cost of borrowing of increased interest rates. Since 2010-2011, core funding from the Welsh Government has increased from 99 million to 126 million, a 26% increase in cash terms, but a 15% reduction in real terms. Overall, in that period, £77 million of savings have had to be delivered from the annual revenue budget. A 4-year forecast for the medium-term financial plan is included. It highlights £34.7 million more savings to be delivered over the medium-term financial plan to ensure a balanced budget is achieved. This is a base case scenario with sensitivity and risks considered later in the strategy. The requirements for these savings are also front-loaded, in that the burden falls earlier in the period rather than later. The authority's medium-term financial plan model is continually updated. The brought-forward modelling contains the base budgets of the authority overlaid with assumptions that are then updated in the light of updated data and information. This allows prudent changes to be made to the modelling to enable the gap between resources and expenditure to be highlighted. External data from sources such as the Office for Budget Responsibility and the Wales Fiscal Analysis Unit support the budget assumptions applied within the modelling. This is further supported by the work that Welsh local authorities produce through the Welsh Local Government Association that allow the assumptions that are made throughout the budget and financial planning process to be validated and challenged. The modelling assumptions are detailed on pages 18 and 19 of the strategy, and this is followed by analysis of the sensitivity of these assumptions and alternative scenarios. And I'd also like to say that this strategy was presented to the Governance and Audit Committee yesterday, and we were pleased to receive very positive feedback from that committee. And I'd like to thank the officers involved in putting this strategy together. I believe it's a thorough and robust strategy, giving us a mark in the sand as we look to the future. And I look forward to answering any questions and receiving the feedback of this committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Callard. And we will move on to, I should say, first of all, Peter Davis, would you like to add anything before we move on? So we'll move on to questions from the committee. I see Councillor Buckler with your hand raised.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Councillor Callard, for introducing this very important report, which obviously has huge implications for the well-being of the Council for years to come. There are a few questions that have come up to me. In what way does the medium-term financial strategy that you present today differ from any strategy that's been before? You mentioned it looks further into the future, but what material differences are there? And how is this going to revolutionise how the Council operates, which is what you infer from the way you present it? And what do you mean by a link of separation from the medium-term financial strategy and the medium-term financial plan? Why divide the aims from the plan? Also, you say you're going to fully refresh the rollout of budget holder training. What does that entail, and what's it supposed to achieve? And the organisational development and culture change you say is needed. What do you mean by this, and what culture change have you identified? I'd like to make a point in your introduction to the report. It seems overtly political. You mention national strategic context over the last decade. The Council has faced significant challenges, 14 years of austerity, the implications of Brexit, and more recently the COVID-19 pandemic, wars in Ukraine and the Middle East, persistently high inflation and the national economic situation, saying that these have created significant financial pressures, albeit partially supported by positive Welsh Government grants and settlements. You don't address the fact that Monmouthshire has been one of the lowest funded councils in Wales, and you sort of state the sort of problems the council has faced the last 14 years. You don't say that these problems were caused by things that have happened before. You know, it's unhelpful. We are a council of various political groups who are there to do the best for our residents of Monmouthshire. So I would like to see the political references taken out of this report, and I'd like to have your feedback on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Buckler. Councillor Callard, you may want to address certainly the last of those points, but however you wish to do that with Peter Davis.
Thank you, Councillor Buckler, for your questions. I've tried to write down as many as I can, but I think I might have started a bit late. So if I miss any points, then please come back at the end and catch up. On the medium term, on why is this strategy different from anything the council's bought in the past? I think you used the term revolutionary. I think that might be a little bit stronger than how I would phrase it. But this is the first time that the council's taken a view out for 4 years rather than an annual cycle. And I think that does bring benefits when we look at our planning, and it allows us to take a longer strategic view. So we can be, we can spot trends out into the future further. We can look at the financial outlook out into the future further, which would allow us to plan better and hopefully be more sustainable in our decision making and make better decisions as a result of that foresight. On the medium-term financial strategy and the medium-term financial plan, on the differences between those, the medium-term financial plan sits underneath the medium-term financial strategy. It's not intended that this strategy will change significantly over its course of 4 years, whereas the medium-term financial plan will change. It will be continuously updated, and indeed it will inform the budget rounds in individual years, and Cabinet will review it on a reasonably regular basis. So that's the separation there. The strategy sits above the plan and helps guide the plan in order that it can set its direction. I'll leave the questions on training and culture to Peter Davis, but I will pick up that point about your view that this is too much of a political document, mentioning austerity, Brexit, COVID, war in Europe, war in the Middle East. I don't think these are political statements to make. I mean, you might not like them because some of them were brought in by a Conservative government, but the truth is that they have made local authority funding less than it may otherwise be. So I think it's right to point out facts that give us context to our current situation. I think if there had been a positive history of policy, then we also make that. You will have noticed in my introduction that I mentioned a 15% real terms cut in our funding from Welsh Government. So it's not that I'm picking sides here, I'm just trying to elaborate on the context in which we find ourselves. And I'm sure from reading the plan you will have noticed that even though we have an incoming Labour government, the future does not look actually like it will ease particularly quickly, and we are forecasting, as I mentioned in my introduction, a £34 million shortfall over the next 4 years, which is going to be a significant challenge for this authority. And I'd like to reassure you, and all members of this committee and the public, that we do and we will continue to advocate for a better settlement from Welsh Government for Monmouthshire. Can I hand over to you now, Peter, for the other points? Thank you.
Could I just add a couple of things before you do? I think Councillor Buckler's question also it included this point that it does seem to be a marked oversight in identifying the causes of the financial challenges that we face, to make no reference whatsoever to the fact that we are at an outlier receiving among the lowest of all direct grants from Welsh Government, and that the gap between an average Welsh Authority settlement and ours is growing by the year, but certainly over £40 million. It does seem to be an obvious thing to be pointing out to residents that is one of the drivers of the financial challenges we face, and it's not there. The other point, I suppose, just in reference to Councillor Buckler's point about this potentially being seen, I would imagine we'd all agree it would be unhelpful if it's seen as a political document rather than a financial strategy. There are references to 14 years, and that just sounds like it comes straight out of political campaigning over the course of the previous 6 weeks. So those 2 points, if I may.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, on that last point, I would say that a financial strategy is a political document. The strategy that this council takes with its money is a political choice. So the idea that a financial strategy should be apolitical, I think that argument doesn't hold much water. And on your question about the fact that it doesn't mention comparative data on our funding with other Welsh authorities, I think that's a valid point. It doesn't contain many comparisons with other authorities. It's not really the purpose of this document, but that comparison isn't in it, and that's a point that we'll take away and reflect on. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter Davis. I guess to the initial points of questions about training and culture change, Peter, but any other points you wanted to raise in regard to those questions?
Thank you, Chair. So first off, just want to amplify the point, I think, just in terms of the medium-term financial strategy. So clearly, this is a document that's been developed with Councillor Callard, with Cabinet, with the leadership team in its formation and its development to the point at which you see it in front of you now. Clearly, it's been authored by myself in conjunction with Jonathan, and to that end, and from my perspective, and I think Councillor Callard has referred to this, you know, the references, where there's a sensitivity in terms of the politics around it. You know, I'm making an apolitical comment here, that it is based on fact, the funding constraint upon which we have had to sort of endure, I guess, as resulted from 2008-9, ostensibly from 2010, and what we, I guess, commonly refer to as austerity, but where we've had to grapple with real-term reduction in funding. So it's just to make that point. I don't need to go any further. On the point of training, This is an important piece of the strengthening of our financial management arrangements. We haven't, as a council, refreshed, updated and rolled out budget holder training for a number of years. It's been done often on a piecemeal basis, on the basis of new managers, obviously taking on budget holder responsibility on a needs basis, but notwithstanding that, I think you'll understand there is a need here, given current circumstances, given the challenges we've got in front of us. You know, the need to own this and to deliver against the medium-term financial strategy and the challenges. That's a whole organisation effort. It is not you know, a matter that just sits with myself as Section 151 officer, with a small number of senior officers and/or members. It's a whole organisation effort, and in that respect, budget holder training is but one important facet of ensuring that you know, those with supervisory and management responsibilities and that are coupled with budget holder responsibilities are suitably and adequately trained. So that's the intent of that training. So that's on that point. To the second question, in terms of, I think it was referred to as culture change. I don't think the word culture is referred to in the medium-term financial strategy. I think it talks specifically to a programme of change and improvement, which is and I know, Chair, I think it's been referenced in some of the dialogue and discussion that we've had here in Scrutiny when presiding over other finance reports in the last 12 to 18 months, and clearly given the concerns around the financial situation. And I think just take a straight line, I guess, to probably the singular recommendation from Audit Wales's financial sustainability report. Their recommendation is, I think, one and the same recommendation that applies to the other 21 councils in Wales. And that's the need to ensure that there is a developed plan and in terms of how budget shortfalls over the medium term are to be addressed. And it's a weakness not just in Wales, it's across the UK. And it's got its own innate challenges, as we well understand, because political cycles operate on 5-year cycles. And, you know, some of these decisions are particularly difficult, particularly when you're operating in a world of uncertainty. And when you stretch out beyond a 1-year budget horizon, things become challenging. But notwithstanding that, there needs to be a much more well-developed programme of change and improvement, and that's the commitment that's embedded within the strategy document. I think it's also important to highlight that whilst the strategy document talks, I guess, to the type of lens that will be applied to that programme of change and improvement, obviously that detail needs to develop and be worked through. That will be a separate and important standard of work that I think you'll understand, Chair, is not owned by myself and Jonathan. Finance will play a heavy part into it, but that is actually a wider political and senior officer leadership challenge in order to bring the proper detail and shape to that. That is being worked on in parallel at the moment, and that will be brought to the fore in the forthcoming months and be developed, obviously, in its further colour and detail to both inform more immediate budget setting processes, but to Councillor Callard's point, to inform the medium term, because we need to have that surety in terms of being able to overcome the budget shortfalls that are obviously signalled within the strategy and over the medium term. So that is what is ultimately meant by that. Back to the question.
Thank you, Peter. And Councillor Buckler, were there any aspects you wanted to follow up on? Are you happy with those responses?
No, they were fulsome and clear. Thank you. But I just go back to the point that perception, just let's look at perception, because it was perceived when reading it. The initial part of the report seemed political. So I'm just making that clear point. I understand that we need to do a very strong medium and long-term plan for the council. That's indisputable. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you, Councillor Buckler. Councillor Callard, your comment that this is a political document, I respectfully suggest that the point here is not to recognise that that you are the cabinet member and the cabinet is a political party, and that they are the group who are running the political choices made by made for the organisation. We understand, we recognise that, but this is a medium-term financial strategy that applies to all residents, all employees, and I would have thought that you would probably want to ensure that you do everything you can to get all councillors to support it. So Councillor Buckler's point may be well worth listening to. I note, for example, on page 14 there of Appendix 1, there's a reference to the last decade, which then moves on to talk about squeeze in real incomes and a fall in house prices. Really? Over the course of 10 years? So, I think you might just want to look at whether or not the picture that is being painted is one that properly presents the basis for the undoubtedly significant challenges that we all recognise, and we will want to, I'm sure, help make sure that the council navigates its way through. And see Councillor Howells with your hand up.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, officers, for the report, and thanks, Councillor Collard, for bringing it. I think my point has already been covered with the. I just wanted. I was sort of slightly alarmed to see the shortfall of 34.7 million, and in the first year of 12.2 million for the following year, actually. Representing 6%. I was just wondering if there was a comparison with other organisations. It'd be useful to know if we are in this together, or are we unique to the rest of the country in the increases.
Thank you, Councillor Howells. And Councillor Callard?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the question, Councillor Howells. We're certainly not in this alone. I know other authorities are also facing quite large budget gaps. It's usually in proportion to the size of their budget and also the demand that they're seeing. You will have read in the news a lot recently about the pressures in social care. We're not immune to those. Some authorities are exposed to a greater extent than we are to those pressures. So we are not alone. I think, highlighting the gap that we see for next year and in the years ahead of that, I think this is a really good opportunity to try and understand the modelling, which is helping us to frame those numbers, because these are estimations based on a point in time and some assumptions that we're making about the future. Now, if we can be sure of one thing, we can be sure that our assumptions right now will not come to pass. It will be more of something, less of something else. But it's important that we make that distinction at a point in time and with a set of circumstances. And that gap exists taking into account our expected increase from Welsh Government in our funding, which is supposed to be less than the rate of inflation again in the next year. And it also takes into account a predicted council tax rise of 3.95% as detailed in the document. It may be that, it may not be that, but it's important to look into the modelling. And I think when you look into the modelling, you do get a grasp of the risks and the flexibility around this plan, and about how some small changes can actually quite drastically alter the result. And there's a nice table, forgive me if I forget what page it's on, which just details some of the sensitivities around some percentage changes in some certain environments, such as staff pay awards, and how those will affect the overall picture. So it's very useful to give context to how we're looking into the future. Thank you.
Councillor Harold, so is there any follow-up that you want to?
Thank you, Chair. No, that's fine. Thanks, Councillor Collard. Yep.
Councillor Pavia.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. just one initial point on aesthetics. I wondered if Councillor Callard and officers could possibly look at changing the figures 2 and 3. They are really challenging on the eye and are very clear to read. So I wonder if that's an initial bit of feedback that could be taken away. We have a commissioning and procurement partnership between ourselves and Cardiff Council through its holding arm Atabian, and the partnership was set up to allow us to generate revenue, but also increase our financial resilience and grow the commissioning and procurement knowledge base within the authority at a time of shrinking budgets. So we were able to be nimble enough to do more with less. Has that 3 years of work enabled us to improve our strategic financial modelling and planning? The second question linked to that, and it's also linked to the next agenda item, a key element of strengthening our commission and procurement capacity was to ensure that our financial data was mature and comprehensive to enable us to have a better understanding of yes, cost drivers, which is obviously highlighted in the report and a piece of work needs to be done, but also that we are capturing the right data to drive more accurate financial forecasting and to give us early insights really into growing risks and pressures. So is the data that we generate as a council comprehensive and robust enough to allow us to undertake the most effective assessments and generate the best budget assumptions to shape our MTFP? And does it allow us to make better, more informed decisions on that plan? And finally, Chair, in terms of figure 5 on page 20, given the narrative and context within the report, you said about age and demographic, about increased demand, why, and I suppose it's the Councillor Card, but why do you believe scenario 1 is the more likely scenario than scenario 2, given that it's said on page 22 that undertaking the model of demand and particularly complexity in relation to adults and children's social care services and additional learning needs is so very difficult? So why do you think scenario 1 is the more likely than scenario 2? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Pavia. Councillor Callard?
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to bring in Peter Davis and probably also Jonathan Davis on a couple of these points. But just figure 2 and 3, I completely agree with you, Councillor Pavia, that they could be clearer. So that's definitely something that we'll go away and have a look at. So thank you for that feedback. Regarding the data, I will pass over to Peter Davis to cover that. I think it's it's a well-timed question. The next item on the agenda is the digital and data strategy, and there are some crossover there in terms of what we're going to be talking about. But in terms of the forecasting, I'll just hand over to Peter Davis. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Callard. Yeah, just back on that point around figure 2 and figure 3, it's probably useful to just mention that I think with the full suite of enabling strategies and those that have run ahead of this one, let's try and get this right now: procurement strategy, asset management strategy and people strategy, financial strategy and digital data strategy today, and a customer strategy, or as I guess entitled, will be the final one in the suite, I guess. But there is work in train at the moment to create accessible and easy-to-read versions of the strategies individually and as a suite, which I think is really important, just to sort of highlight in terms of making sure that it's not just it's both accessible, but to a variety of stakeholders, and that can be everybody from staff, members, residents, clearly, and other public third sector organisation stakeholders and the like. So it's just to make that point, but yes, we can take on board in terms of the finalisation of the long document, and certainly take feedback, as we have done from Governance and Audit Committee, to make some of those changes. In terms of the point around Atabian, points well made by Councillor Pavia, and Councillor Callard's point, highlighting and stressing the importance of data to drive clearly decision making and our modelling. Clearly, the medium financial strategy quite clearly highlights the need for greater levels of sophistication around modelling and around cost drivers. Procurement spend, the spend of the council is clearly a very significant component part of that. Do we have all of the data that we need? No. And I don't think there's any issue with making that statement, and I think, in fact, the digital and data strategy recognises the further advances that need to be made in terms of making sure that we've got the level of granularity where we need it to inform our, so it may be well be the case that our current information systems are collecting data in a certain way. It's not how we need that data cut in order to be and layered to be analysed. So I think that is just a part of acceptance that that's an area of development, and the digital data strategy recognises that. We have been working with colleagues from Atabian and Ardle, isn't it, I think, actually. So we've been working with them, obviously, since the collaboration went in situ, and since the procurement strategy and the strategic intent of the procurement strategy was laid out and approved by Cabinet. And one facet of that is, again, the development of both the systems and the underlying data. That's work ongoing at the moment. I know there's been some independent work that's been done actually by them and commissioned around areas where they can look to drive improvement. And I'd like to think that will be forthcoming either to the committee or obviously reported as part of just ongoing updates in terms of progress on the procurement strategy in forthcoming period. In terms of the question on scenario one, I think Jonathan is probably best placed to provide a clear, succinct answer on that one. So if okay, Jonathan, are you okay to come in on that?
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Chair. Afternoon, everyone. Yeah, so I think I think the first point on this is that this is a point-in-time assessment. It's continually updated. Day by day we flex some of the assumptions around this modelling. I think in terms of scenario one, why we consider that the most likely, I think it speaks to possibly the work that's ongoing within services around preventative measures that looks to stem some of that demand coming through. So whether that's the work within housing and homelessness to reduce our high cost placements. Similarly within social care, where a lot of our preventative work is looking to avoid that high cost and high complexity demand coming through. So we're starting to see signs that's working. That's coming through our financial forecasting. So I think when we talk to a high demand environment, we're probably talking to the most extreme kind of post-pandemic period where demand was very extremely high and was coming through. So measures have been taken to reduce that, and it would naturally come down off the back of that spike that we saw. I think it's probably important just to note that sophistication within the data is important. That's continually developing. So as that gets better, we'll be able to provide differing models and scenarios to this. These 5 may well not be the 5 that we go into a medium-term financial plan update in the autumn with. So they'll be flexed as required. So I think in summary, we consider that we've probably moved past hopefully a peak in demand that we saw both during 22-23 and 23-24 financial years. And we're currently modelling that demand to be more in the middle of where we would expect it to come through. So hopefully that covers off the kind of assumptions that we took at a point in time for this report.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thanks for those responses. I've got a few. I see no more hands. I've got a few points and questions. One of the points that I think has been raised already today is the importance of trying to ensure that we get the residents of Monmouthshire to both understand and get behind this plan for it to be effectively delivered. It seems to me an extremely important aspect. So they are going to, it would be reasonable, I think, for a resident, a council taxpayer who this year they may well be thinking they're paying, compared to the current level of inflation, somewhere close to 4 times a council tax increase, 4 times the level of current inflation. Sorry, I'll hand over to you in a second, but and next year the indication that it would be twice the level of inflation. So it's this point that it's extremely important that we get the residents of Monmouthshire to understand what is being proposed here and just what the solutions are that are being presented. The issue of the shortfall over the span of this plan, 34.7 million. Cardiff University was commissioned last October, November. They presented a report. I think it was commissioned. I think it was supported by Welsh Government and WRGA. What the shortfall looked like over the course of the period up to 27-28. And they concluded up to 27-28 that the shortfall across all local authorities was 744 million. On a pro-rated basis, that we're projecting 34.7, pro-rated against the population base of each of the 22 local authorities. That would seem to suggest that we're significantly above the average in terms of the shortfall, but welcome your thoughts on that. The new government, just as the previous government, had indicated a 5-year fiscal plan of 1% control in real terms increases of the public sector. And the protected departments have got historic increases ranging from National Health Service to about 3.5%, through to schools 2%, defence 2.5%. So to get to 1% as an average, with those huge departments set to receive much more than that, it would appear to indicate that the remaining unprotected departments are likely to be receiving some level of decrease in central government funding to be seen, but you can't add up those numbers, as far as I can see, any differently to that. And the unprotected departments being local government, justice, benefits and pensions. So, it remains to be seen what happens there, but it would indicate something less rather than more coming forward, which would support, and I should say also, really congratulations on developing this into a strategy which it really does try and explain the situation and the approach to people who we hope will be very interested in reading this across the county. And it is trying to engage them, and it is trying to explain to them as clearly as possible. So I very much appreciate that. And I also recognise that these are challenging times that any public sector organisation lives in, and I don't suppose any of us would want to try and describe as fun trying to plot your way through these years. So I recognise that, and I also appreciate the efforts that have gone into this. So asking the questions that I am are not to do anything other than try to strengthen the ability of the plan to be able to ensure it is successful in what it's trying to achieve. But yeah, the potential would seem to be very strong for less rather than the current anticipation of 1% growth to come local government's way. And I just wonder to what extent we're building in that potential. It's worth, I think, probably just reflecting that 5 years ago, when we would have been doing a 5-year plan, I don't suppose any of us, let alone those who would have been preparing the strategy, would have anticipated a pandemic, a Russian invasion of Ukraine followed by an energy price shock and high inflation. I don't suppose 10 years ago we would have been anticipating a decision on Brexit and political upheaval, and 15 years ago that we would have been anticipating financial crisis and so on. So the point about that is events tend to overtake the best plans, and the question behind that is, to what extent have we got any scope for flexibility if in the next 5 years events develop such that they are going to challenge public authorities in the way that has been the case over the last 5, 10, 15. And that connects to reserves, which appear to present some real concern in terms of response to that particular question. So the reserves are indicated in the report as the cash reserves at being at a level which are described on page 16 of the report, minimum acceptable levels. I was interested on page 31 to look at reserves, which are the capital reserves, at a level of, the reserves overall being at a level of around 25% of what they were at 2022. And by the time we get to 2028, that's on page 31. So very interested to understand what that reserves picture says in terms of our capacity to be able to deal with whatever challenges may lie ahead that we cannot plan for. To what extent have we got the capacity to do that? There is, I suppose that the question that sits behind the projection for this year, next year, and the following 3 years is that the track record of the Council over the last 2 years is that we've not been able to close the gap on overspend, particularly within the areas of adult social care, children's services, and homelessness. If we're unable to close the gap, which is projected to be 12.2 million next year, how are we going to deal with that situation if our reserves are at already a level which we stated as being a minimum acceptable level? What is the, I don't want to call it a plan B, but how are we going to address that, let alone any of the further 4 years? And just a couple of final questions. We're talking about change and improvement. Is it realistic to be talking about improvement? Improvement in what regard? Is this improvement that our residents would be prepared to see, or is it improvement in our financial sustainability? Really interested to understand that, because it is difficult to see how improvement in service delivery can be made possible in that context. The capital receipts I was referring to earlier in page 54, they're described as minimum usable capital receipts reserve declining from 10.2 million to 2 million over the course of the plan. So am I reading that correctly in straightforward terms as seeing that our capital receipts reserve declines by 8.2 million, we would be left with just 2 million by 2028, and that sits alongside the cash reserves that we've referred to earlier. And then just finally, the strategy appears to absolutely be predicated on our ability to make what is described in the plan as radical change, on page 38, to the Council's operating model and services. So it appears to be predicated on our ability to make radical change, and I'm using the words that are in the plan. but it doesn't describe what the radical change would be. I completely would recognise that that would be forthcoming in the plan, the detail, but surely we would want to understand just at least the elements of that make the numbers stack up. So, in what way would radical change look like in the operating model? And if by connecting that with page 39, as the strategy does, the radical change relating to the greater use of AI, automation, and data analytics, and clearly, as Councillor Callard said, it connects very well with the next agenda item. What does that mean in overall strategic terms for the authority?
I'm sorry, Chair. You've been speaking 10 minutes now. I'm losing sight of what questions were buried in all that. I wonder if it would be possible to give Councillor Callard at least a chance to decipher what the questions were and then answer some of them.
Yeah, certainly. I don't think it's difficult to decipher the questions. Happy to go through them again if you weren't clear about them.
I'd rather you didn't.
Well, if you're saying that the questions are not clear, I'll happily try and make them clearer.
I think so that you buried them in 10 minutes of
Sure, I accept that. I think that's very reasonable, but I also note that no such questions were arising from yourself or from Councillor Crook during the course of the meeting, so there are a lot of questions that need to be asked. So you'll forgive me if I'm asking them and that, several council members are not present.
But it's your normal practice to restrict committee members to 3 questions, I seem to recall.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I accept that. I'm accepting the need to ask questions, and rather than avoiding that. I don't know, Councillor Strong, if you're suggesting we don't ask questions.
I'm not asking you to avoid the questions. I'm asking you to break it down into reasonable sections.
Yeah, happily do so. So can I leave those points on the table, and then I'll come back to the last one. And I don't know, Councillor Callard, if you'd like to address those first of all.
I think also as well, Councillor Strong and Councillor Crook had this yesterday as part of governance and audit as well. So this isn't the first opportunity they've had to scrutinise this plan. You mentioned at the start about council tax proposals, and I would just remind you that there are no proposals in this document. These are just modelling assumptions, looking out into the future in terms of if this was to happen, then what would be the outcome. We are not proposing a council tax increase. We are saying if the council tax increase was this, then this would be the result. So I think it's a bit disingenuous to suggest that this is making those proposals. I think, again, I mentioned it earlier, we do need to draw the distinction here between the strategy and the plan. You mentioned about the radical change to the operating model and the services that are going to be required, and what are they. That is detail which will be forthcoming in the plan, and I think you're absolutely right to acknowledge that this is going to be challenging and difficult, and that we need to deliver it because the alternative is that we will end up reducing services further, and that definitely is something that we want to avoid as much as possible. You spoke about our reserve balances. You're correct to say that they are, I think they're in the middle of the acceptable minimum threshold. It's for that reason where we had no recourse to our reserve, our capital reserve budget, sorry, not our capital reserve budget, our revenue reserve budget in this year's budget setting process. You mentioned that our capital receipts reserve is now 25% of what it was in 2022. And I just remind you that that's because we spent a considerable sum on our schools renewal programme, and that is predominantly regards to the new school which is currently being built in Abergavenny to replace the ageing King Henry VIII school, which I was happy enough to go to, but it's not changed since I was there, and it's definitely in need of renewal. You talked about closing the gap on social care and these areas where we have seen significant pressure over the last couple of years. Is that pressure set to continue? I think, again, that's really a question about forecasting, because the important thing is that we correctly forecast the demand that we are going to have, because that's what defines whether we overspend or underspend on it. And it's very challenging in such a volatile and high-cost environment to forecast that demand. I think Peter Davis, when he mentioned earlier about our assumptions, we recognise that it's an area that we can always get better at, and we need to get better at it. The better at it we get, the better value for money that we'll be able to provide for the council taxpayers of Monmouthshire. On your question about is it realistic to be talking about improvement, I take your point that improvement's not really defined here, and I think it would be better put as value for money. I think we need to ensure that we are really pushing for an improvement in the value of money for the services that we deliver. And that's going to be really paramount over the next few years where, as you're aware, spending will continue to be constrained. I think I've tried to pick up on most of the points you've made there, Chair, but if I've missed any or if you've any more, then please remind me. Thank you.
No, thank you. I think you picked them up very well, and appreciate that. I don't know, Peter, if there are any additional points that you want to make in relation to the question around reserves. Wasn't so much why they were being used or where they were being used, but actually if the end point in the plan is that we arrive at £2 million in capital receipts reserve, and our cash reserves are at a minimum acceptable level. From where would we where would the capacity come, financial terms, to be able to deal with unexpected events? Talked about 5, 10, 15 years where no one would have anticipated what has actually happened. It's not an unreasonable thing to think in similar terms now, looking ahead, that unexpected things happen. So where does that reserve position leave us? Particularly interested in that.
Thank you, Chair. I'll maybe pick off the point first off, just in terms of capital receipts, and I guess once I've wrapped up a few responses, just to cover everything off. If Jonathan wants to come in, that's absolutely fine. But just in a broader sense on usable capital receipts, to recognise, I guess, and across over the medium term, there is still factored into that, and through the reduction that you've obviously observed over the medium term period, there is still continued flexible use of capital receipts to support those costs associated with service reform. So that talks back to your point in terms of needing to ensure that we've got the capacity, obviously the one-off resource in place to enable that transition, that important transition to be made. Furthermore, and to the extent, and this is about through medium-term financial planning and budgeting that now follows with the strategic framework put in place, there will be decisions that will need to be consciously taken. To give an example, you could take a conscious decision to exclusively use capital receipts for that. To the extent that where there was capital investment or pressures that needed to be attended to, that they get dealt with through borrowing, so that cost is spread over the medium and long term. So there are conscious choices that can be made in looking to achieve some of those objectives, but I think maybe just to sort of reflect back on the last couple of years, so whilst accepting, and I think Councillor Callard's referred to it, we brought a budget framework in place last autumn that informed both the budget recovery plan that we put in place to respond to the quite unprecedented situation that arose with inflation last year, but it also informed the budget process for 24-25, and as Councillor Callard's highlighted, our budget principles there in the framework held true, so that reserves were not depleted any further. Notwithstanding that, to acknowledge, I think schools have got their own unique challenges, and I think that is something that will be probably quite at the forefront, I guess, of some of the deliberations that we will need to have as part of the wider and more rounded budget conversation. The point around the 5-year fiscal plan of the government, unprotected departments, etc., etc. While the most recent report upon which this now strategy is based from the Wales Fiscal Analysis Team is predicated on having worked through those most recent sort of indications from the then Chancellor, how those play through, how they play through in terms of departmental budgets that may either come via consequential or may come directly through the Barnett formula to the decisions and the permutations that are then needing to be considered by a Welsh government, and in terms of how it allocates its funds and resource, particularly and predominantly across the NHS and local government in Wales. So it's not a direct, I think it's dangerous to take a direct read across from, a point well made that I think there will be departments, probably within England, unprotected ones, that will suffer as a consequence. But I think Wales, as a result of the funding mechanisms, consequentials, and through the Barnett formula, there are more local decisions that need to be made. And I think it's been shown in the relationship that local government has had with Welsh government, as much as it does with the NHS. Local government has made its case very strongly for funding and has fared well in recent years, and despite the challenges that have been faced. So I think it's just to make that point. The point around budget shortfalls and the pro rata, and that the 34 million looks as if ours is, I guess, in proportion larger. I think we just need to recognise points of timing. So when that global figure was arrived at and communicated, that was done last autumn, early autumn, in order to inform the case made by leaders in the WLGA to Welsh Government for funding for local government. Clearly, our strategy, our updated modelling is predicated on updated figures. It stretches out another year. We make, obviously, we've got more developed work around pressures that we feel are going to feature over the medium term, and our assumptions have been updated. So I think you've got to just take a comparison, I think, on that one. And then I think just in terms of just drawing this point out, I think Councillor Carr talked to it around, is it realistic to talk about improvement? And I think Councillor Carr was right to talk about value for money. But if you just sort of take a step back, the primary purpose for the financial strategy is to put the financial framework in place to enable the delivery of the community and corporate plan. And the priorities set out within that plan, if delivered, are there to drive improvement. Any council has to make decisions in terms of things that are its priorities and things that aren't. And take decisions as to where things need to be more effective in their delivery or improved as a reason of demand and need. And that's a much bigger conversation to open up. But a budget is not a straight line. Not everything gets cut in a situation where you've got a budget shortfall. It is about decisions and choices. So it's just, I think it's just to make that point, and I think you've echoed quite regularly, Chair, in previous conversations around the innovation that needs to drive the change in the operating model, and that's absolutely the case. But if we deploy that innovation in the right way, we can hopefully buffer the adverse impacts that otherwise we would see by having to address those budget shortfalls over the medium term. So that's probably covering everything off. I don't know whether John feels he needs to add anything. He doesn't need to, but
Thanks, Peter. Only briefly, just one point. I think just back to the reserves point, I think there's a suite of performance indicators within the strategy that, if delivered upon, we would hope enable a resilient level of reserves and balance sheet strength for us moving forward. So it's important that I think we've developed those indicators and those that can give us perhaps early warning of risks and issues that could impact on us. So just wanted to make that final brief point.
Thanks, Jonathan, and thanks, Councillor Callard. Thank you, Peter. Just to finish with a couple of other questions. I was mentioning earlier that on page 38, the Council's operating model will have to radically change, is what's indicated, and I would certainly support that. But there isn't any real description, even in outline terms, of what that means. And I completely acknowledge that a plan can set that out in detail. But surely we need to be able to have an understanding of what that in outline terms would look like. So are we talking about a reduced size of organisation in staffing terms? Are we talking about the embracing AI, as you move on to describe in page 39, AI, automation, data analytics, wider process redesign, in order to be able to deliver services that are currently delivered by people? Clearly it's very, very broad, it's very, very general, but it would be important to understand what you mean by this. It'd be good if you could possibly address those 2 points. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think I just, reiterate again that detail will be forthcoming in the medium-term financial plan when that's published in the autumn. I'm afraid you'll have to wait for that plan to be published. Thank you.
Yeah, just recognise that we're already in the second quarter of the first year of the plan, and it's extremely important that we crack on with whatever changes are going to be implemented. So if what you're saying is we won't see anything that begins to reveal what these radical changes are going to be until possibly the third quarter, it really suggests that we won't see very much happening this year, and it will be the second year of the 5-year plan before changes are effected. So it does beg questions about whether or not this is really being driven as hard and fast as it sounds like you're saying it needs to be.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's worth saying that the budget for this year is set, that the budget includes some changes to our services, and that will, we hope and expect to deliver throughout 2024-2025. The financial plan will be used to inform next year's budget and the budgets coming out of that in future. So with regards to this in-year period, the budget's already set. This strategy includes this year, and it looks out 4 years, as we've talked about. But in that, it is a strategy, it's not the plan. And so I think we've discussed this a little bit so far, in that it really lays the foundations and the groundwork and the guide rails, if you like, of how we plan to look out into the future.
Thank you. Councillor Crook, I see your hand up.
Yes, Chair. I haven't put any questions in because I just think we need to realise that this is a unique proposition by Monmouthshire County Council. This is the very first one of its kind, and it's a delivery plan. It gives us a better understanding with a level of further commitments. It gives us a strength and robustness of levels of agreements. It gives us a strong strategy over the medium term. Audit Wales, only yesterday, congratulated us for going into this financial and medium term. And also the tempo. We're looking at this every 6 months, certainly in the modelling. Which is encouraging, and closer scenarios with our services. Don't forget, we have hundreds of them, and obviously going forward, on long term, we really can't fix some of the costs, can we? I'll just mention one cost that will be a problem going forward, and that's cost of fleet management. So I'm really looking forward to implementing this plan and this strategy going forward, certainly from this meeting.
Thank you. Thanks, Councillor Crick. This is a scrutiny meeting. It's not a debating chamber, and therefore, our job is to ask questions, is to scrutinise and not make statements that are...
I don't think it was a statement. I just said that I didn't have any questions, but I was for this going forward. It wasn't a statement of business.
Okay, thank you. So I don't see any other questions arising, and I'm going to, therefore, first of all, thank you. And I repeat what I said earlier, that this is clearly an extremely challenging period to look ahead in, and doing this over a 5-year period where there is a lot of uncertainty out there, is not the envy of, I'm sure, anyone in this room or beyond. So thank you for that, and also for the way that this is set out, as I mentioned, which goes a long way to trying to explain the situation to interested residents and businesses who are going to really need to get behind this. And so the questions that I've been raising, that others have been raising in the room and online, I'm sure are intended to try and make sure that we achieve those aims. So thank you for the responses to that, and I move the recommendations of the report, and I see no objection to doing so, so we will move on. And we move on to what is, I think Councillor Callard, you referred to this as quite rightly, a strongly connected report, which is the digital and data strategy, which again is pre-decision scrutiny ahead of Cabinet on the 17th of July, which is next week. So would you like to introduce the report, Councillor Callard?
Thank you, Chair. I also neglected to say earlier that I'd like to extend my thanks to the committee for putting on a special meeting in order to hear these two items before they
important.
came up. It is appreciated. I'd also as well just like to welcome James Vale. He's been sitting very patiently as we discussed the financial strategy, but he's been a key figure in bringing this strategy forward. The strategy sets out the vision, themes, aims and actions for the next 3 years. The strategy is key in enabling the delivery of the Council's policy aims as set out in its community and corporate plan. Digital and data are recognised as key enablers for changing and modernising services, improving operational efficiency and effectiveness, and enhancing outcomes and impact. Putting residents and users at the centre of everything the Council does is key, ensuring that digital and data services are intuitive, accessible and responsive to needs and expectations. The Council is ambitious and optimistic about the potential for digital and data to make a positive difference to the county and its communities. The Council also needs to be realistic and aware of the challenges and risks that are faced, such as the fast pace of change, the increasing demand and expectations, and financial challenges. These challenges and risks will be addressed proactively and collaboratively, seeking to maximise the opportunities and benefits that digital and data offer. This strategy covers a range of themes and areas, setting out how digital and data would inform service planning and delivery, placing the needs of residents at the heart of everything the Council does. In its development, the strategy is drawn upon best practice and innovation in the digital and data field, both locally and nationally. The input and feedback received has been invaluable, and the strength of partnership and collaboration will continue in delivering this strategy. An annual delivery plan underpins the strategy and will evolve to ensure that the changing needs and priorities of the county and stakeholders and the ever-evolving digital and data landscape can be reflected and responded to. Progress and impact will be measured and evaluated using both quantitative and qualitative methods. Learning and achievements will also be communicated and shared. And I look forward to the committee's questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Callard. And I open the report for questions, and I see Councillor Buckler with your hand up.
Thank you, James. Very interesting, your report. And as you state in your report, it's an incredibly important part of what will be sort of council services strategy, bringing together all sorts of new technologies in the future. What I'd like to know is, what collaboration have you had with officers in Monmouthshire Council, and how have you gone about putting together a report regarding Monmouthshire Council? And what difficulties do you foresee in getting the council workforce to embrace new technologies and data-driven processes? I'd also like to know, are you using this strategy at the moment in any form? Thank you.
So who would like to respond? James or...
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I think it's maybe helpful as well, I think, to the committee if I'll pass over to James now, but James, it'd probably be helpful for you to introduce yourself to the committee, because and just to sort of provide a bit of context. So yeah, many of you will be familiar with Emma Jackson, who was our former head of digital design and innovation. She left the council and secured another job just over the Christmas period. We've helpfully, and back to the point of collaboration, we've helpfully sort of strengthened ties, and James, we're in an arrangement with James and Torvine. James is leaning in a level of additional digital leadership support for us. And he's been instrumental, I guess, in working with us and the wider business to bring the strategy together. So just a little bit of context for you, but James, introduce yourself in your own words and leave it to you to respond to questions, and as needs be, hand back across to us if you feel it's a better place for us to respond.
Welcome, James, to the meeting.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Peter. Good afternoon, members. So in terms of that first question, Councillor Butler, in terms of collaboration, so obviously, as Pete's alluded to, I've been leaning in and providing some support around digital since the beginning of the year, so since January, having the benefit of working quite closely with the digital design and innovation team and colleagues around data, so Richard, Matt Gatehouse, Sean Hayward, and the information security and that SRS relationship. Also a lot of familiarity with the work that Emma was working on. There's lots of similarity in terms of the journeys that our respective organisations on and wider partners across the Gwent region. So there's lots of synergies and lots of similarities there. Specifically in terms of developing the strategy and the accompanying report, been out to all of the DMTs over the last couple of months really to understand both their priorities, their drivers, the opportunities that might be prevalent in those areas, and also to sort of table the draft strategy, get feedback, and it has evolved following receipt of that feedback from DMTs. Clearly there's also been engagement at leadership team level as well, Councillor. In terms of the second question around embracing digital and data processes, I think as the strategy touches upon, there's lots of good foundational work already in place. So there's already some good practice around this area, but that's not to say that more can't be done and needs to be done in this area. So if I refer you to some of the specific activities in the delivery plan that's appended to the strategy, refers to undertaking digital data maturity exercises, and that's both in terms of use across the council, but also in terms of skills. And we've already touched upon that real close alignment with the other enabling strategies. So, outcomes of those digital and data skills assessments will obviously dovetail with some of the work around the people strategy and identify that support, that learning and development that's required across the organisation to help us get to that next level in terms of use and embracing the new technologies that are on the horizon.
Thank you, James. Councillor Buckler, did you want to follow up on that?
Yes, well, it was, what difficulties do you foresee in getting council workforces to embrace the new technologies and data-driven processes, please?
Sorry, Councillor. Yeah, so I think it's mixed, isn't it? You know, clearly, as I've touched upon, some people will have that aptitude, those skills already, and that's great. It's about empowering them to do more, if you like. For others, where skills and competencies are perhaps at a lower level, it's about providing that specific support to make sure that they both understand the possibilities associated with digital and data, and then are supported to develop those skills and competencies to make best use of them. And I think that's one of the biggest barriers around this. The pace of change, technology evolves so quickly. How do we try and keep ahead of that curve and make sure that we're always minded on what the next opportunity might be, and how we're preparing our colleagues across the organisation to be able to make best use of those solutions. So it's really about detailed engagement, regular communication with staff, with the workforce around, what are we doing in certain areas of the business that might work elsewhere across the organisation, what are the opportunities on the horizon, how can they get involved, and making sure there's good promotion of the support that will be in place around some of those technology solutions.
Thank you very much, James. That's great.
And James, it's interesting. Your title, if I've got it right, is the head of customer ICT and digital at our splendid neighbours in Tarvine County Borough Council, and do carry our best wishes back to your colleagues. But it is very, I think, very interesting that you link up customer with ICT and digital. It's not just about affecting change, but really with a customer perspective. I find that very encouraging. Thanks for responding there. I see Councillor Howells with his hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just a few questions from me, really. One is, I noticed the access to devices was mentioned in the report. I was just wondering how that would be. I know our local library, you can take a laptop out from them. I don't know what access schools have for students. The second question was the MyMon app. I remember discussing with Emma Jackson previously that there was an update due on the app, so I was just wondering where that was as well. And finally, sort of touching with Councillor Butler on the consultation that took part with the elected members. I don't know if that's just through AI or whether we were approached individually. I don't recall it. But also, I mean, I really would benefit from some, from a council point of view, some training. Sort of, I think we were all, many of us were new in 2022 and received quite a lot of training. I think we have a better understanding how the council works now, and maybe some of the programs that are available to us could be better explained, and how we could be more efficient as councillors as well. Thanks.
It's very interesting and really good questions, Councillor Howes. On the latter one, I suppose part of that relates to the fact that as councillors, we can be hopefully very useful, very helpful in helping to bridge the gap that some residents, it might be in community councils apart from anywhere else, but residents may have in understanding what change means. And we might be able to help explain that if we understand it. So your point's a very good one. Perhaps Councillor Callard or indeed James, if you want to pick that up, or Peter.
I'll come in first, if that's okay, Chair. I think that point on training is very valid, just so we can all keep ourselves up to date, and then hopefully pass that knowledge on to our residents. I've speak to lots of residents, and they're not even aware that there's an app or the best ways and most efficient ways of reporting things. So I think that's a great idea. On the access to devices, it's a very good point. It's something that we are aware of, especially as more and more services for our staff, as much as anything, go online. So we've started a process whereby members of staff who aren't office-based, they might work in a road team, can borrow a laptop from the authority in order that they can use that to support their work. Schools are usually much better equipped with IT equipment, but for more detail, I think, James, have you got any further information on the various ways that you can access IT within the authority?
Apologies, Councillor, probably not got anything more specific than what's been referenced already, but I think the importance around, access to devices, that's just one potential barrier, isn't it, to digital inclusion. And I think, again, linking the reason why we've linked digital and data, that insight, understanding why residents across Monmouth might be digitally excluded will clearly inform the best solutions to enable and improve that digital inclusion. So whilst we might offer access to devices, do we understand at the moment whether that's effective, whether that's meeting need? Potentially yes, potentially no. So that's where the data component comes in. What else could and should we be doing? Where are those pockets of prevalence around digital exclusion? It's all these things that we'll need to tease out as part of the delivery of this strategy, I think, moving forward.
Councillor Howes also asked about the consultation and whether or not consultation was carried out with councillors.
Thank you, Chair. I think part of this process with scrutiny is definitely supporting that consultation element. I'm not aware that any councillors have been specifically spoken to, with regards to consultation, other than the documents being published and shared online for everyone to have to engage with, and also through the scrutiny process.
That reference might just need to be amended if we're giving the impression that councillors were consulted. It would be worth looking at that again. I don't know, Peter, if you want to add anything or.
Something to highlight, naturally, as you would expect, as was the case with the financial strategy, it's been developed in conjunction with Cabinet and being engaged, provided comment and feedback. And yes, obviously we've got the opportunity here and through Scrutiny Committee, so I guess it can be tempered slightly. I acknowledge the point. I think there was another question by Councillor Howells, and probably one we'll have to defer to providing a separate update and written response just in terms of the app upgrade. Obviously it's a very specific matter that sits itself away from the strategy, but happy to provide a response separately on that one.
Yeah, thank you. The issue about consultation without overstating it, I suppose other councillors might feel, well, they weren't included if it suggests that they were. But anyway, point made by Councillor Howes. Yeah, please.
Yeah, just one further comment, which is one around. I think James was made sort of passing reference, really, just in terms of it's not as if we are without foundations. We had a conversation yesterday at Governance and Audit Committee to do with a report from Audit Wales, and that was with regards to our digital, the digital strategy and recommendation around us bringing it through. The report hasn't really landed with us on a timely basis, and clearly in the interim we've developed the strategy and it's in front of you now. But I think the important point, coming back to something James alluded to, is that we're coming off the back of some really firm and solid foundations, both within Monmouthshire, working across with other local authority partners. I think James is evident to that sort of cross-working, and obviously with and through the SRS and other local authority partners. So we've got really good foundations in place. And we've got very good examples of where we've delivered very innovative outcomes and that have delivered back to this point in terms of effectiveness and efficiency. To the point, coming back full circle to the point of members, I think it's Democratic Services Committee, I think, which is the conduit for capturing feedback from members, and that has been the case previously, and in terms of both matters of training and equipment and technology provision, and therefore, that alongside lots of other feedback that we've captured through interaction with users and residents, that is all fed in to the development of the strategy. So we're not starting with blank canvas, and we've not chosen to ignore all of that hugely valuable insight and data that we hold. You know, that has informed the strategy. What we've done is bring the strategy together and James has obviously been at the forefront of that, and therefore looking to validate that what the strategy is therefore saying, you know, that is you know, it's, as James said, it's gone into DMTs. DMTs have commented and fed back, and I think in the main James acknowledged and recognised and accepted that the areas of focus are the areas of focus that are needed. We've done one and the same thing with strategic leadership team, same outcome, and we did the same thing with cabinet, same outcome. So lots of validation through that, but my point is it was all built upon you know, the level of intelligence and capture that we've had over recent years. So, you know, and there's a vast amount of insight and intelligence that obviously is swept up in all of that.
Thank you, Peter. Councillor, I should say, Councillor Howes, was there anything that you wanted to add to that? So, Councillor Strong.
Thank you, Chair. 3 questions, if I may.
You certainly may. They may be long questions.
Sorry. Right. It's very clear from the report that it's not just about us collecting data to make what we do at our end better. It's also about making it easier for our residents to access our services. It's well known, if you make it easier for people to access services, which is clearly a good thing, that increases demand. Have we sort of modelled in potential increases in demand? If it becomes easier to report potholes, we may have a lot more potholes than we thought we had. If we're recommending, as we do in one of the real-life examples, that I believe it's George goes down to his local hub to get help, have we got sufficient staff in the hubs to provide the sort of help that might be required, which I assume is not just answering George's immediate question, but helping George to do it for himself in future. So I think perhaps we need to model that in if we've not already done so. Difficult to do that, but it's a consideration that shouldn't be ignored. Secondly, again in relation to poor old George, in the real life examples, I think we need to be very careful not to add to the sort of narrative that's out there that elderly people are no good at using social media, the internet or digital in any form. Of course, it's statistically true that older people are less likely to be connected online than those farther down the age scale. But we have to be careful we don't give the impression that's because they are some way intellectually impaired. George might be a very sensible person who has great distrust of information that's coming to him digitally. The report does mention cost. If you're on a pension, you're on your own. You know the cost of being connected is quite a significant one. So can we just be careful with any narrative that we might accidentally promote there? I note in the impact assessment there's various positives that are identified, and you know that they're all fine. There are no negatives. One negative I'm worried about is that as we become increasingly online and digital, the problem of isolation increases. You know, you cannot go into your bank and speak to a cashier anymore. Even us, half of us are online this afternoon. I've come up so I can speak to lots of interesting people. You know, flippancy aside, I think it is a problem of increasing isolation. I worry about people who are working from home. I would hate that, to be honest. Some people seem to like it, but it can be a problem, and we need to take that into account, I think, in our impact assessments. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Strong. Some really good points there, and you know the point about digital exclusion, as it's very often referred to, I suppose, directly does lead to isolation in some cases. But good to hear the responses, Councillor Callard.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Strong. I think some really great questions there. You know, especially about that first one with increasing access. Is that going to lead to increased demand? I would argue that the demand is already there. We just don't know about it. You know, if people are struggling to access it, so that data will be very helpful for us. You know, if the more data we can get about the services that people require, will allow us to improve those services, target those services, design those services better. And I'd also say that where people use council services, if they can access council services through the website or the app, or if they can access them digitally, where they would otherwise access them through the call centre, it's a cost save for the council to handle things that way and to prioritise things that way. So that might offset any additional, newly uncovered demand that we find. And in fact, that would be preferable. We want people who need to use council services, who want to use council services, to come forward and tell us that they want to use them. It will make us a better council. I completely accept your point about the narrative about older people being worse at IT. My grandfather is 90. He's very good on a computer. It's a stereotype, and it's not a very helpful stereotype sometimes. So I do acknowledge that. And I think that's got some parallels to your next point about isolation as we move further and further online. I share your appreciation of coming and meeting people face to face. It's always my preference, but I know being online works for a great many people. It increases accessibility, and in fact, there may be cases where it's easier for people to use online services than it is for them to leave their houses to go and access services face to face. But I think it's a very valid point, and we know isolation is growing as a problem in our society, and we do need to be cognizant of that. Thank you.
Peter, yeah.
Yeah, just a quick point, just on that point of isolation. Really, just use hopefully a good example, because I think the point by Councillor Strong is well made. If you take a contextual piece, take adult social care, referred to it earlier, financial strategy, huge demand, growing complexity, budget pressures. And we talked in the financial strategy in terms of change and innovation being driven through. This is one important vehicle, the digital and data strategy, to allow us to drive savings, efficiency, and more effectiveness in terms of provision of service. So you take, for example, a cohort of elderly or vulnerable people who are in receipt of social care in a rural council. You would probably want to get into a position where maybe assistive technology and use of technology looks to allow certain aspects of social care provision to be dealt with in much more seamless ways, and in a constrained environment for the limited resource that you do have, for that to be directed, I think to Councillor Callard's point, in a tactile and human face-to-face way. But it's making sure that those contacts are the ones that really, deliver the real value. If those other, maybe more routine exercises can be done either via technology or through other means, that's a good outcome, both in terms of assisting the council's financial position, actually delivering more quality social care provision face-to-face. It's the blend of all of those things. So when we talk around the enabling strategies, aligning with each other, that's an example of it.
Yeah, some really interesting points that arising from those questions, and I suppose the empathy that we can ensure we inject into the hard issues of digital and data to recognise that there are different groups out there. It becomes really important. I see Councillor Pavia with your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks, James, for producing the bulk of the strategy here. I suppose one simple question: in what ways does the strategy ensure that digital services and data capture are designed with a user-centred approach in mind, which will meet the needs and expectations of our residents? I think that's a key one for me, that it's user-centred. In terms of working collaboratively with other local authorities. I anticipate further collaboration, potentially service integration with our local authority partners in the region moving forward. Peter Davis said about, we're coming from a good base. That we have the shared resource service across the majority of the region is a good platform to allow us to do that. But have we got that sort of common digital infrastructure, data architecture, governance structure that allows us to be aligned with our local authorities in the region, so there can be interoperability and scalability of digital and data services should decisions about service integration take place with, if we wanted to do some more work with Torvine, more work with Newport, etc. Have we got that in place? So, we're collecting the same data in the same way, that is, it's analysed in the same way that we can, if we need to make a decision about service change, the whole issue about interoperability and how systems talk to each other and how how we're collecting data and everything doesn't become a sticky issue, as it were, that potentially is a risk that needs to be, or a significant risk that needs to be mitigated. And I suppose that the final one, sort of underpinning that, how are we creating that data culture that fosters data literacy and awareness and innovation amongst our staff, our partners and our residents, because the use of data for evidence-based decision making is so important now. Are we doing enough to foster that culture? I understand there'll probably be some initial surveys to ensure that we've got a baseline to understand where our staff are, but is there more we can, is there more that we can be doing about that? And there's so much potential about harnessing use of digital technology and to find some of the solutions for our really wicked challenges, particularly in social care. But our staff, our frontline workforce, equipped to do that, to grasp that? Are they being encouraged to do that? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Pavia. Peter.
Yeah, just to help you, Chair, I think if maybe James, if you're okay to come in to respond to the majority of those questions, I'm sure Richard, who's here, can look to come in, I guess, on that latter question, particularly around sort of the data culture and that being embraced and fostered. So is that okay, James?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Peter. Yeah, so to come back on the first question around that user-centred design and approach, I think again there's already evidence that that's in place in pockets within the council, and that way of thinking is already there in some areas. It's about how do we grow that and embed that across the organisation, and I think we touched upon that earlier in terms of training requirements and understanding some of that. So when we talk around digital, it's not just the technology side, it is that way of thinking, isn't it, and that way of working with which puts the user at the heart of what we're doing and why we do it. So that's a prominent part in terms of aim 3. In relation and picking up Councillor Strong's point earlier on around the persona, George, it is, I completely take the point, it's a made-up persona which isn't evidence-based, just to try and tease out potential impacts and delivery of the strategy. But one of the activities actually within the delivery plan is the development of proper personas, if you like, which are based on evidence, based on data, which really reflect the population of Monmouth and provide much richer insight into how and why someone might need to access services, preferences and those sorts of things. And they shouldn't be used in isolation. There's clearly, we need to be doing proper user research and direct engagement with our residents, because there's a place for that type of tool, if you like, as well, to help with that user-centred design approach. In terms of your question around collaboration, so yes, we've got examples of sort of shared infrastructure. We've got some commonality in terms of core products. So all of the 4 local authorities use the same CRM, for example, which drives a lot of the transactional correspondence around the council. So there are some commonalities. There's a collaborative project underway at the moment around that data piece, so the infrastructure and to tackle some of that, which will hopefully put us in a better place around data collaboration and linking our own data sets within councils to begin with. But yeah, so there's a lot of that work either already there or sort of in situ. And I suppose that's a nice little segue to hand over to you, Richard, on the data questions.
Yeah, thanks for that, James, and thanks, Councillor Parry, for the question. I think it's a really important one, because I think when we strike the heart of why we've got the strategy in place, because it's about not having a central data function. It's about how we enable the organisation who know and understand their service area to get better with the use of data, and also the benefits that brings in having that in collaboration with a digital strategy as well. When I think about data, we often jump to how we use data, how we manage data, the skills we need, the tools we need to do it. But I'm really pleased you mentioned culture, and I think leadership goes alongside that as well, in driving the use of data in an organisation, and some of those categories I talk about linked to the action we've got in the strategy around data maturity. That in itself is a tool to help us understand where we are, but equally it's to help service areas who go through that process to understand and learn where they are with their data and where they can look to improve and embed that data within their service use and in their service design they provide to customers. And as part of any data maturity model, pretty much every data maturity model, leadership and culture is part of that, and that can then help us inform and drive more specific actions we do to support it. I would say, within the organisation there is a positive attitude towards the use of data in informing service, and similarly with leadership as well. Right from the top in terms of asking for data and evidence to inform decision making, as I saw you see come through to this committee. Equally, as the strategy sets out, there's an opportunity to further strengthen that and embed that across the organisation, with an organisation that delivers hundreds of services, with many devolved data expertise and specialisms within those, having a way to harness that collective knowledge we already have and build on it, and share that within the organisation, and equally having the opportunity to learn and share that from and within partners and in collaboration with others where we've got shared challenges as well, as James has described, is another opportunity. And I think for us in terms of data as well, we know we don't necessarily have all the skills, coming back to the skills issue, within the organisation to move into more of the predictive, preventative, data science type spaces. We're going to need to look at, who can support us in providing some of those skills to provide that level of analysis and delivery as well. So that's really important part of it. But, I think culture and leadership is really key to driving that through.
Okay, thank you very much. And Councillor Pavio, did you want to follow through? Were you satisfied?
No, that's fine. Thanks, Chair. Thanks for the answers, yeah.
Just, if I may, before bringing in Councillor Lucas, who I know has a question. So 8.3 and 8.4 in the report, they define that the delivery of the strategy will generate savings and efficiencies, which I'm sure, and reducing costs, increasing productivity, improving outcomes, which I'm sure we would strongly support in those aims. And 8.4, however, is the sting in the tail of that, which is that, as it puts it, the council may need to invest in skills and capabilities to deliver the strategy. I would have thought it's less about may but will. And going back to the earlier report, if the delivery of major changes, radical changes to the operating model and of services will very significantly feature the adoption of AI, automation, data analytics, wider process redesign. I don't suppose there is any organisation in the Western world that isn't saying they want to embrace those very things. Those skill sets are in very high demand. Are we going to try to invest in them? How are we going to go about that? And do we have the financial wherewithal to be able to make those investments in order to be able to deliver the aims of 8.3, which is the efficiencies and cost reductions?
Thank you, Chair. I think that's a great point. We're very lucky in Monmouthshire to be part of the SRS, which we can use as a vehicle to to deliver some of these savings and efficiencies through the use of data analytics and AI, as you mentioned. And I know the SRS is currently an extremely effective service, and we're very pleased to be a member of it. And it's, I think we're very lucky to have that vehicle to use going forward, which will help us to share the resources required in order to deliver it. But you make a point about invest to save. I think this council is always going to be willing to invest to save, whether that be through use of capital receipt reserve or whether it be use of borrowing where required. But looking out to the future, it's something that we're always going to be willing to do, I think.
Thank you. It's a couple of times that the responses have included the potential for additional borrowing, either to fill a gap in the potential shortfall or in something of this nature. My understanding from previous discussions that we've had at this meeting have been that we don't have more scope for additional borrowing. That must be wrong in my understanding. Could you clarify that possibly?
Just in terms of a broad response, yes, we have borrowing headroom, but clearly we operate within the throes of the Prudential Code, prudential indicators, and that are embedded within both our capital and treasury and investment strategies. I got back to my point earlier. You've got to be taking conscious decisions and working within the throes of the Prudential Code and making sure that any borrowing that is undertaken is, within the limits that are in place and considered, and that borrowing is affordable, sustainable, and prudent. So those decisions are going to have to be taken, in a way and aligned to both the medium-term financial strategy and plan, but also the capital investment strategies as well.
Thank you, Peter. And moving on to Councillor Lucas, I think you mentioned you had a question as well.
Afternoon again. Thank you very much. It's very interesting listening to this. I don't normally sit in this committee, so I'm learning a lot this afternoon. I'm sorry, I'm a bit boring on this, but we're talking about making efficiencies. I get it, and we need to, but and consultations, etc. So I often use my Mon app, and I have a real problem with the fact that residents find it awkward to use. It's it's not user-friendly, I think it's the phrase to use. And that in doing so, we also must hold a great deal of information, data protected, obviously GDPR protected, for our residents. And yet we talk there, I've heard you speak of frequently this afternoon about consultations and including residents and bring them along with us and making them understand everything that's going on. Yet we do not use this information to contact them with options and the chance to contribute to these consultations. They are hidden and it's very hard. So when I speak to residents, they say, how am I supposed to know about that? I haven't got time to go chasing on the website. So whilst I actively encourage my residents to use this app, we must therefore have the ability to collect their information. We clearly do. So why are we not optimizing the opportunity to consult with them frequently and easily and allow them to see what's actually happening, albeit short and brief information? Because it, to me, seems a lost opportunity. On another slightly different point, how do we know that the things that our staff are using, the officers are using, are up to date and user-friendly there? Because from what I'm gathering, they are not always the case. It's not always the case. There's lots of duplications, lots of opportunities to make it easier, swifter, and time-saving, which would therefore give us more production for our man-hours. So that's another, I suppose that's probably even a bigger point. We're not as user-friendly and up-to-date on those things, and it really is costing us money because they're duplicating. There you go. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Lucas. Who wants to pick those questions up? Councillor Keller?
Thanks, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Lucas, for the questions. I agree with you that the app and the website could certainly be better. I think we're on a journey there, a journey of improvement, and hopefully that we will see continuous improvement in that area because it is important. I think, you know, occasionally I log on to the website and it will give you a list of when your bin days are, the local planning applications, and there's good data there, but I think it could be easier to access, it could be better laid out. So I will take that on board and I will take that forward. You had a question about, you know, the data we've got, why don't we use it to improve consultation? I think, again, there's a lot of merit in that. I would add that we do need people's permission in order to use that data in that way, and we'd need to get that permission from them in order to contact them. I mean, you know, just like we send out correspondence to households in Monmouthshire when we need to contact them for various reasons, we have that ability, and I think it's about just making sure that we are targeted and cost effective when we do that. But for sure, IT is definitely a very good way to, you know, extend our reach.
Thank you. Peter, did you want to add anything to that?
So I'm going to ask James to come in first, and the reason for that is, and I guess, James, I'll leave it to you to just sort of couch it in terms of, I guess, with the 4 local authority partners and the SRS, those strategic priorities that are being brought to the forefront, because I guess they talk quite directly, don't they, to Councillor Lucas's point. I guess I reflect on MCS and the CRM, the website, you know, and each of those obviously featuring customer services architecture, actually featuring very significantly, I guess, into what's going to be, you know, a priority not just for us but for the other local authority partners. And I know, James, which is why I'm handing it across to you, that you are taking leads on some of those strands of work. So don't know whether you want to offer some supplementary further comment. I guess that'll just give Councillor Lucas some further reassurances.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Yeah, absolutely. So I touched upon the collaborative project around data earlier on. The other ones we're looking at are around contact centre platform, contact centre infrastructure, the use of automation and AI, website development, and the potential to use a tool called Local Gov Drupal. So there's these projects which are ongoing at the moment, working on the principle of we're all trying to do the same thing really across the SRS partnership and the 4 local authorities, and can we combine efforts on some of these key strategic items to save effort, reduce that duplication and achieve more really, and we're starting to see some benefits around that. And if I take your point specifically around staff and making sure they're equipped with the right tools and things to make sure they're not having to duplicate effort, they're not having to do repetitive tasks. So one of the projects, and this is the one that I'm sort of leading on, is around the implementation of tools like Microsoft Copilot, which is billed as your kind of AI personal assistant, if you like, and it can automate a lot of manual tasks like minute taking and things like that, which, you know, free up your time to be more productive in other areas. So it's about taking that learning quite quickly, and we're doing that. We're able to do that more effectively by working across the 4 local authorities rather than us all trying to develop our own learning individually. We can share some of that learning around different parts of our respective organisations, bring that together to then more quickly, I suppose, benefit from that shared learning and roll out across the organisation. So we've got a much better understanding of how Copilot may be able to help us as authorities, may be able to help our staff by working in that way, which ultimately will benefit our staff because we'll be able to introduce it a little bit quicker and roll it out a little bit quicker. So there's lots of tools, you're right, there's lots of tools out there, and sometimes it's about trying to hone in on the ones which are most effective, because you can spend a lot of time testing things and they all do variation of a theme. So yeah, what we're trying to do is focus that concerted effort, do it effectively across the partnership so we can benefit from that shared learning.
Thanks, James. And the fact that we've got the shared learning, the shared working, it clearly gives us good opportunities. So I'm sure the committee would support that approach. I see no more hands. Yes, sorry.
Sorry, I just wanted to come back to Councillor Card, if I may.
Yeah, briefly.
Yes, I have been raising this, and I think this is probably the 5th time, sorry for my fellow councillors to be bored with this information, but I've been raising this constantly about the MyMon app and going back on consultations. But we have to, because, for example, I get told when my bins are being collected. So there is already, to get into all this, I've already given my personal permission for MCC to email me privately on my Mon app. So we've already done the GDPR thing. So that's already ticked off in my humble thoughts. I'm no expert by any means, but as far as I'm concerned, I've ticked off on it. So for me personally, and I would perceive that that's likely to be the same. But I just keep saying it because people keep asking me and I keep coming back with the same answer constantly. So I should be looking at the camera, not at that screen, constantly saying, why is this not being done? And the answer is, it's not being done. And there's no answer for me. So it's very annoying when I talk to my residents and they keep saying, well, I don't know. I don't know. And it just seems stupid. We're missing the golden opportunity to solve issues. Sorry, but there we go. Thank you very much.
Okay, Councillor Lucas, you made your point really well, and I heard Councillor Callard saying he could see the strength in the point, and I think you indicated, Councillor Callard, you're ready to have further discussions outside this meeting just to see how that could be addressed, so thank you. And I see no further hands, so I'm going to move the recommendations which are set out that the committee scrutinise the proposed draft digital and data strategy and provides feedback to allow further comments to be considered for the final draft to be presented to Cabinet for approval. So I move the report, and I see no additional points, so that is approved and accepted. And thank you all for for being at the meeting. First of all, it was an important meeting that we scheduled, so I really appreciate everyone finding time in the schedule. Thank you, Councillor Callard, and to Peter and to Richard and to Jonathan for making sure, and also to James for being able to accommodate that too. It's much appreciated and some really important ground covered. So I note the next meeting is on the 16th of July. At 10 o'clock, so back to some semblance of normality in that regard, and I close the meeting at that point. Thank you again.